Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty provocative, a really philosophical take on politics, aimed right at, well, freedom advocates. We're looking at Larken Rose's article, Don't Say You Weren't Warned. Said. Our goal here is to pull out the main arguments, the surprising insights from this really impassioned piece, and help you understand his, let's say, uncompromising view and what it means. This isn't your average political chat. Rose gets into fundamental stuff like individual freedom, authority. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's definitely radical. I mean, it goes against a lot of common ideas about how we should engage with politics, right? And he uses really strong language, almost moral language, you could say, to make his points. It forces you to think.
He gets right into it, too, with this core distinction he makes. He calls it analog choices versus digital choices, or binary. So analog is like exercise or diet, right? It's a scale, there's nuance. Because self-ownership isn't like that.
Exactly. It's not a spectrum for him. What's fascinating is how he takes this binary idea and applies it straight to politics. He basically boils down to this. You either act based on your own conscience as a free person, or you hand over that ownership, you accept political rulers and their authority.
Right. You accept it as legitimate.
And for Rose, there's like no in between. It's one or the other.
And here's where it gets really sharp. His main point, voting, any political participation, really, no matter who for, and that is your consent. You're consenting to be ruled. And if you consent, he argues, you kind of lose the right to complain when things go wrong. That's a huge part of his argument, maybe controversial for some.
Definitely controversial. It hinges on that idea of no partial self-ownership. You're either free or you're submitting. Full stop.
So that binary thinking, that consent idea, it leads right into another big theme. This
Yeah.
illusion, the illusion of control that democracy supposedly gives us. Rose thinks supporting any politician, even if you think they're the lesser evil, is still just choosing a master. And he doesn't hold back. He specifically calls out libertarians, people like Tom Woods, Dave Smith, Alex Jones, for backing Donald Trump.
Yeah, he really goes after them. He says they basically sold out principles for political convenience. His argument is they helped put an authoritarian in power, thinking he was anti-establishment or something. And now Rose says they're trying to backtrack, but the damage is done. And this connects to a really key concept he brings up, controlled opposition.
Okay, controlled opposition. What does he mean by that exactly?
Well, the idea is that some figures seem like they're challenging the system, like they're outsiders fighting the power, but in reality, they actually end up reinforcing it. They draw energy away from, what Rose would consider real change and channel it back into the existing power structure.
So for Rose, Trump is the perfect example of this.
Precisely. He sees Trump as pretending to fight the deep state, that entrenched power structure. But then, in practice, enacting more authoritarian stuff, increasing spending, stirring up war talk. It's not just that Trump was ineffective. In Rose's view, he straight up calls him a con man.
Wow, a con man. That's strong.
Yeah. He thinks Trump fooled everyone, the establishment, and his own supporters. It really shows how deeply disillusioned Rose is with the whole political game.
And building on that disillusionment, the language he uses about voting, it gets really intense, morally intense, like you said, vote, and you consent to be ruled, period. And then he takes it further. If you support a master, you share the moral blame for what that master does.
Exactly. It comes back to that binary choice again. You can't partially own yourself, so you can't partially consent or partially share responsibility. It's all or nothing for him, which, logically for Rose, leads to only one ethical conclusion.
Which is?
Disengagement, stepping away from the whole political system. That's the only way, in his view, for someone who truly believes in self-ownership and freedom to stay morally consistent.
So participating in L is compromising your principles.
That's his argument. It's a pretty radical departure from how most people think about political change, obviously. He's saying true liberty just can't exist alongside political authority. You have to reject the authority itself.
And his critique doesn't end with individual voters or specific politicians. He also takes aim at the Libertarian Party.
Oh, yeah, he really lets them have it.
Says they've done, what, nothing since the 70s?
Basically, yeah. But maybe worse than doing nothing. He thinks the party actually serves to legitimize the whole political process. It makes people believe in authority, he argues, instead of trying to get rid of it.
He uses that image, right? Trump speaking at a libertarian event.
Right. In front of that become ungovernable mural. Rose just skewers that as this perfect, painful irony.
Yeah, you can see why he'd find that jarring.
For him, it sums it all up. A movement supposedly about freedom, seemingly endorsing the very system it claims to hate. And he links this kind of philosophical betrayal to real-world stuff. He mentions potential war with Iran, economic problems, authoritarian policies. He argues people who voted for Trump, for example, are facing these things now not because they were naive, but because they chose expediency over principle.
And that's where he uses that analogy, the arsonist one.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. You gave an arsonist the keys to your house and then are shocked he lit it on fire.
Oof. Yeah, that definitely lands with impact. It's a biting way to put it.
It absolutely is. And that's kind of where he ends the piece. He vows to stop even talking about Trump. He just urges people who care about freedom to ditch the whole political circus, as he calls it, and get back to first principles.
Okay, so what are these first principles for Rose? What's the alternative he's pushing?
It boils down to a few core ideas. First, self-ownership. You and only you own your life and body. Absolute control. Second, non-aggression. The total rejection of initiating force or fraud against anyone else, the NAP, basically. And third, voluntarism, the idea that all human interaction should be voluntary, consensual, no coercion.
So no rulers, no masters.
Exactly. For Rose, these aren't just nice ideas, they're the non-negotiable bedrock.
Yeah.
He fundamentally believes that participating in political rituals, especially voting, just feeds the beast. It strengthens the system. Real liberation, he thinks, has to start internally, in your mind, by rejecting the whole idea that anyone has the right to rule you.
It's a philosophical shift, first and foremost.
Right. Not about finding a better politician, but about rejecting the premise of political authority altogether.
He mentions his film too, doesn't he? Jones Plantation?
He does. It's a fictional metaphor he uses often. It shows how enslaved people can be tricked into thinking they're free just because they get to choose between different masters.
Ah, so it ties right back to that controlled opposition idea, the illusion of choice.
Precisely. It reinforces the idea that the choices offered within the political system are often false ones, designed to keep the system itself intact.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? Rose's core message is pretty stark. Political participation itself is the issue, not just picking the wrong person. He sees it as consenting to be ruled, and therefore you forfeit your right to complain.
Yeah, so let's quickly recap the key takeaways from digging into Don't Say You Weren't Warned. First, that analog versus digital choice. Political authority isn't nuanced for Rose, it's binary. You either accept it or you reject it.
Okay.
Second, political participation equals consent. Voting, even strategically, for the lesser evil is still an act of submission in his eyes. It legitimizes the rulers.
Got it.
Third, controlled opposition. Be wary of figures who seem anti-establishment but might actually be reinforcing the system by diverting real dissent.
Right, the Trump example he uses.
Exactly. Fourth, the libertarian sellout critique. He accuses some prominent freedom advocates of abandoning principles for political expediency. And finally, principled resistance. For Rose, true freedom isn't found by voting for nicer masters, but through unwavering commitment to those first principles: self-ownership, non-aggression, voluntarism. Rejecting the whole master-slave dynamic.
It's definitely a challenging perspective. It leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? If Rose is right, if voting is consenting to be ruled, then what does real principled resistance actually look like in a world where politics seems to touch everything? Is just disengaging enough? Or does that bring its own kind of responsibility? Something to think about.